proud to say I got the wide receiver room, which was a little bit of a challenge because there's a lot of questions around this room.
Yeah.
3 questions in particular. The biggest elephant in the room is what do you do with Tyreek Hill,
Mm-hmm.
which we've talked about quite a bit, and I'll address that first. The next question I saw was, do the Dolphins want a big physical receiver? Now, we could think all day that they need a big physical receiver, but do they actually want one? So I'll address like the wants and needs around whether or not a big physical receiver is still a thing in the NFL, and it's something that the Dolphins could look to do. And then my last question was, where is the depth? Do we have any depth worth bringing back? Right? We had Malik Washington as a wide receiver 3 last year. Is this a guy I could see being the wide receiver 3 going forward? Do we need a new one? So let's start with Tyreek. The only way I am trading a wide receiver or even recommending to the GM, which is the role I'm playing today, the only way I'm walking into Chris Greer's office with this idea of trading Tyreek Hill is if we are getting a big physical receiver back. Are we getting the only one I even know who's available is T. Higgins. Are we getting a T. Higgins back, right? Are we getting a guy who is 6 foot plus, who can high point a ball and is unhappy with his current situation and wants to move on, right? If that is not happening, then, or if there's no way for that to happen, then there's no way I'm walking into Chris Greer's office with that idea of, hey, we should trade Tyreek Hill, right? Because you just don't replace that production, regardless of how off he was this year and making business decisions. The drops were a problem. Dropped plenty of balls that put us in games or even won us games had he made the catch. I do think that Tyreek Hill is still one of the most talented wide receivers at the position in the entire league. And for a 5'10", 191-pound soaking wet player, he has the ability to high point the ball like Steve Smith did in just uncanny ways. And we just didn't see it this year. So I'm not going to go ahead and take the one down season and overreact to that and be like, he's got to go. And I understand there's a lot of offseason stuff. I understand he's eating crow on Radio Row during the Super Bowl. I understand that he's got more kids this year than he had touchdowns.
It's a wild stat, isn't it?
And listen, I understand that in his first losing season, he had a little baby B-fit on the sideline where he essentially said he didn't want to be here anymore, which he's now pulled back on. But that's my Tyreek Hill take, is if I am going to make a recommendation, it is not unless we can get another player it's not going to be the same value, obviously, but somebody who can come in here and be the wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2. Nothing less. Don't give me a bunch of wide receiver 3s who are going to amount to nothing, right? Like, give me a second round pick, whoop-de-doo, right? This is a 1,700-yard, 10-touchdown performer. These do not grow on trees. So certainly, as a scout, if I want to keep my job, I am not going into the GM's office and being like, hey, you have to trade the 1,700-yard wide receiver because he said a couple things you don't like in the media.
I mean, that's fair. That's a fair take.
Not going to happen.
So, Anthony, I've actually softened my stance on Tyreek Hill. Initially it was just get him out of here. Here's your plane ticket. I will drive you to the airport. That's how I felt right after the season was over. I've softened my stance on that. I've actually come around to your side on that. You can't just. That being said, Tyreek, if you're listening, dude, shut up.
Yes, for the love of God.
Shut up.
Stop talking.
Stop. With all your.
I'm not even
going to mention the stuff he's been saying. Like, dude.
All right,
yeah.
so
what I have to say.
Can I, Anthony? Can I add one more thing?
Absolutely.
So I think I'm with you 1,000,000%. Right. I think it is very easy to overreact to a down season that was marred by injuries, that had 4 different quarterbacks, 3 of which are high school level quality, maybe. Right. Fine. Offensive line problems. I mean, the list goes on. I will say the one reason I am an advocate for change is not just for the sake of change, but it's because I'm tired of this offense having redundancy at every position, right? And if we can, to your point, and only if we can make sure to get a 1A or 1B type receiver that breaks the mold from everything else that we have, then I'm running as fast as I can to fax, I think is what they still do nowadays in that trade request. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And we'll talk more names in later episodes, of course. We're just setting the foundation here today. I definitely have more names than T, but we've mentioned T before, so I felt like it was an easy one to bring up.
It was safe. Yeah.
Yes. All right, so let's talk about the depth that we have, or the lack of depth that we have. Malik Washington, amazingly enough, played 14 games this year, fellas. I didn't realize he played 14 games because he only really performed in 4 of them, and that was the last 4 games of the season. He put up 16 catches for 169 yards in the last 4 games, which is pretty good for. I'll get into league statistics in a second, but I can tell you from having looked at league statistics, that is in the upper percentile for a third wide receiver. In fact, if he had put up those numbers the full season, he would have had 700 yards. Now that's unrealistic. Wow. Third wide receivers don't get 700 yards, but that's the type of pace he was putting on in the last 4 games of the year. Behind him, though, we had 5 wide receivers who combined for 181 yards on the year.
Yowza.
Ooh-wee. We're talking River Craycraft, Odell Beckham, D. Eskridge, Grant Dubose, and Robbie Chosen. That doesn't even bring up names like Braxton Berrios, who didn't even get a freaking catch this year.
Wow.
Or any number of... Sorry, go ahead, Josh.
How did injuries factor in? Like, how many games did some of those guys play? Just out of curiosity.
None of them played over 50% of the season.
Yeah.
I think River came the closest. Yeah.
I think Berrios got hurt in the Colts game.
Yeah, Berrios got hurt early. Craycraft was hurt in the
Craycraft was out most of the season, right?
Yeah.
I think he played in I think it was around 8 games. I didn't write it down.
Wow, that's more than I thought. In my mind, Craycraft only played 2 or 3 games. That's crazy.
And I know
played, Robbie Chosen played the 1 game and then he got cut because he didn't block on the play.
Yeah.
So bad.
And then Grant Dubose,
Dubose got a concussion.
He did. He did a bad concussion, but I was thinking about the Bills game. The first Bills game, Tua hit him in stride, and Grant Dubose was not looking for the ball. It bounced off of his shoulder pad and was intercepted.
Yep.
And was intercepted.
That was the 3 interception game, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, that was the game where Tua got hurt later on in it. But in the beginning, Tua was playing well, and he hit. Grant Dubose was running a route and was not looking for the ball.
Now, look, I feel like this guy, he has a lot of Jackson Carman in him. I think is that his name? Is that his first name, Jackson?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Dubose came from Green Bay playing no snaps, known as a blocker, which is why we brought him in, and then get thrown in because Tyreek Hill drops 4 passes in a row and Waddle can't stay on the ground when a pass gets tossed to him. And said, "Go figure it out, stupid," and it didn't work.
Yeah, I mean, I should be kinder to him than but that drove me crazy. It bounced off of his shoulder pad. Tua hit this guy right where he needed to be hit, and he wasn't even looking for the ball.
Mm-hmm.
Why are you running around if you're not looking for the ball? You're a wide receiver, man.
Right. So I think with the question, do we need depth? The answer is absolutely 100% yes. I mean, we had 22 catches for 181 yards from the 5 wide receivers that lined up for us behind our wide receiver 3, which was Malik Washington. I do believe Malik Washington could be a viable wide receiver 3 for this team. He doesn't have the size that we're all looking for. I could see us bringing somebody in who ends up being more sizable and having more impact in the red zone. But I thought Malik played particularly well towards the back half of the year. That being said, late round pick. There's no promises. There's no guarantees. He could just as easily be pushed aside for somebody else, maybe another rookie or whatever it is. The only other person or people on this list I would even consider looking at is River Craycraft because of his rapport with Tua.
Mm-hmm.
And then D. Eskridge because he is just a big play waiting to happen, albeit very raw, and could be a special teams contributor. Of the 5 guys behind Malik, he was the only one with a 20-plus yard play. So, yeah. Now let's get to the height thing, which is what everybody's waiting for.
Hmm.
Does the height of the wide receiver matter? Now, for this, I looked at the playoff teams because these are the best of the best. These are the ultimate teams here. What do their wide receiver cores look like? I'm going to let you guys guess here. Taylor, if you had to guess, what percentage of the playoff teams had one of their top 2 wide receivers with a height of over 6 foot tall?
The percentage?
Yeah, what percentage of playoff teams had a over 6 foot tall wide receiver as one of their top 2?
Probably 60% of teams.
I'd
Not
say
a bad
100.
guess. It's 100.
That's
It's 100%. Yeah, every single
Wow.
playoff team had at least one 6 foot tall wide receiver as one of their top 2 receivers here.
Now that's 6 foot and over, right?
6 foot
Yeah.
and over. Now,
Yeah.
Okay.
the percentage of playoff teams that had a player who was 6'3" or over was 50%. But
Wow,
neither
that's
of the
wild.
Super Bowl teams had one of their top 2 wide receivers at 6'3" or over.
Now that's higher than I would have thought, Anthony.
Crazy,
6
right?
foot. 6
That's a
foot 3,
crazy
yeah.
stat. That's a crazy
Yeah.
stat.
6'3" or taller. Some of the names: Nico Collins, Quentin Johnson, Keon Coleman in Buffalo is a surprising 6'4". I didn't even realize he was that tall.
Yep. Florida State guy.
Yeah,
Go Noles.
but height didn't necessarily lead to the best performers. In fact, from what I found, the best performers were in the 6'1", 6'2" range. We're talking A.J. Brown in Philadelphia at 6'1". The pair of wide receivers over in the Rams with Puka and Cup are both 6'2".
Oh, really?
Yeah,
I thought
I didn't realize
Puka was
Cup was
like
that tall.
6. I thought I thought Puka was 6'4" or something.
I
like
didn't
that.
realize. I didn't realize Cooper Cup was that tall. I thought he was closer to like
Hmm.
5'10", 5'11".
it's crazy because the part that stood out to me is that they're trying to get rid of Cup now.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
to Josh's point, where he doesn't want redundancy, is they're getting rid of a redundancy in that
Mhm.
Puka and Cup are the same wide receiver, right? Now
Yeah.
Cup obviously had a much further along in his career, but
Mhm.
from a height percentage.
One could argue that he's washed. Actually, I mean, he's not getting separation anymore.
His body is failing him. But the last
Yeah.
one I wanted to mention in terms of height was Justin Jefferson, also 6'1".
Oh yeah.
So
Okay. Yeah.
it's crazy to me that the 6'1", 6'2" ranges is a gold mine for wide receivers. That doesn't mean that it's only those guys who are good, but a large percentage of wide receivers on the playoff teams were in that 6'1", 6'2"
Well, and
range.
if you think about it, it makes sense, right? Because the average height of an NFL quarterback is 5'9", 5'10", something like that,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
6'1", you're half a head taller,
Right.
right?
The only receivers we have on our roster at that height are Eazy-E and Grant Dubose. And
Yowza.
Eazy-E has spent 3 years on the practice squad and still hasn't developed into anything. And then, of course, Grant Dubose, we just talked about, came over from the Packers and made one colossal mistake and then ended up losing the season to a concussion. So, other interesting things here. The Hill-Waddle combination was like record-settingly unprecedented in the last 2 years. And unprecedented in that they made up such a large percentage of our receiving yards in their first 2 years together that it blew away everybody else. So in 2022, they made up 64% of the receiving yards for the Miami Dolphins.
Seriously?
In 2023, 60%.
That's insane.
In fact, this year, which we consider a down year, was the only year that they were within the league average at 42%. And the league average, at least for playoff teams, was also 42% for the top 2 receivers on the team.
Wow.
So it goes to show that the Jonnu Smith having more involvement in the offense wasn't necessarily a bad thing. It actually led to better balance, to playoff team balance. The problem was that our top 2 receivers just were underutilized heavily in what they in compared to what we used them in the past. So 42% was the average, but the Philadelphia Eagles, their top 2 guys, A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith, made up for 55% of their yardage on offense. The other big one that stood out to me was the Vikings with Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. They also made up 55% of the receiving yards there. Teams where it didn't seem to matter, this will surprise nobody, Kansas City Chiefs. only 26% of their receiving yards came from their top 2 receivers. They're really a spread out team.
Yeah.
More than anybody
70%
else.
went to their tight end. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted to point that out because I wanted to point out that there's a lot of like just misconception as to there's only one way to build a team, right? You have to have the tall receiver and the small receiver and okay tight end. The playoff teams were all built fairly differently. The numbers kind of went in a wide variety of different ranges as to how their top 2 wide receivers and their tight end, which makes up like the top 3, was kind of built out. So if I'm going into Chris Greer's office and I'm making a recommendation to him, it's yes, we do need a taller receiver to make some meaningful contribution to this team, but it doesn't need to be necessarily one of our top 2 wide receivers. I think that Hill and Waddle have shown in the past 2 years prior to last year that they can more than make up for their height just by working in the scheme as well as they do. And I think a lot of that comes to coaching. We weren't able to counter the 2 high safeties this year. We made little to no progress on countering that, which was a big problem. So do we need depth in the wide receiver room? 100,000%. I would love to see a very good wide receiver 3 come in that can just add some consistency to this team, enough picking up the pieces from other people's like trash cans, and not even the top of the trash can. It's like way at the bottom. They've been there for a while. Like no more Odells, no more Robbie Chosens, no more freaking Grant Duboses, right? Like bring us in a solid wide receiver 3, similar to what the Bears did for Caleb Williams last year. Yeah. You know, they had DJ Moore, they brought in Keenan Allen, they drafted Roma Dunze. Like, get that third guy. And I think
now would you do that in the draft? Would you go high?
I would go. So I don't know how good this wide receiver core is in this draft.
That's pretty good.
I think if it's deep, well, I don't see why not, especially if the compensation picks end up working out the way we think they are. The compensatory picks don't come out until March, I believe, but we're expecting a third, hopefully.
And a fourth. Yeah.
A third and a fourth. Yeah, it was supposed to be 2 3s.
Yeah. Using one of those third-round picks is not a bad idea if there's a big physical receiver there. Otherwise, I think the wide receiver free agent room is packed every year because these guys want to make money and nobody wants to pay the wide receiver 3. So I think you can find a guy and convince him to come down for a little less money with the whole there's no state income tax argument and wanting to play in South Florida and getting to be in the beaches and nightlife and all that crap. I think we have one of those very convincing, lots of convincing reasons why you would want to come to Miami. Yeah. So, yeah.
So a lot of what you said, sorry, Anthony. Do you have anything else? I was going to say a lot of what you said was very interesting because there was a lot of talk, and Josh, you're the one who really like pounded the table about like redundancy. Like, I'm not saying like, oh, all is good, let's just run it back. But it is interesting to hear like the playoff teams this year and how they were all different. And what I think, what I've learned from what you've went into here is that the depth is the important part. I'm a big believer in Malik Washington. I thought he was a higher draft pick than a 6th-round pick. I thought he should have went 3 or 4, honestly, 3rd or 4th round. I don't know how he fell that far. So I'm a big believer in him being our wide receiver 3. That still leaves a few spots left. And exactly what you were saying, like we cannot be going back to the OBJs, Robbie Chosen. We got to be getting guys in here that is actual quality depth because obviously we also need it.
Yeah, I guess where my why I kept banging the table, right, is because you have Hill, you have Waddle, you have Malik Washington, who are all relatively the same height, right? And then you get to a point where we need, where it's 3rd and goal, and we need 5, right? And our running game is struggling, or whatever the case is. And what do? We fade it to Tyreek Hill, right? And we've seen it so many times over so many years with this group, with this iteration of the Miami Dolphins, that it just gets exhausting seeing that type of play that would be successful with the 50-50 type wide receiver. which is literally that was driving my entire argument for most of the season with we need to get out of redundant type players. Stop with the small, fast guys. We have enough of them. Let's get the tall guys.
Yeah. I think it's worth noting too that the size itself isn't necessarily, what do you call it? The only factor there, like how they play. I mean, if you look at AJ Brown and Devonta Smith, one's 6'1", one's 6 foot tall. But AJ Brown is 226 and plays like a monster, and Devonta Smith is 170. And if he gets hit too hard, he's probably going to need, to go back into a locker room. So like, it's not necessarily all height. I mean, even another example here, Jamison Williams versus Amon-Ra St. Brown. I mean, St. Brown plays like an absolute beast, and Jamison plays like that glass cannon, right? So like, and Jamison's taller. So like the height isn't always the factor. It's like you need the guy who's built and it just has the physicality. We need somebody physical to come into the wide receiver room because Tyreek Hill was very physical his first 2 years with us, and then this year,
finesse.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. And Malik Washington's 5'8", 191, so I don't think he's going to be physical.
Soaking wet.
No, but to Taylor's point, that dude caught 126 balls his last year at Virginia. Like he can play.
Oh, for sure.
He can ball. And also, Josh, to your point, I've always hated the fade pass, even to the tall wide receivers, even to a Mike Evans. I've never liked the fade. That should be phased out of the Dolphins' offense completely.
Faded out of the offense.
Faded out of the Dolphins. Oh man.
You're welcome, folks. Tip your waiters.
There he is. I've always been a bigger fan of the back shoulder pass. Actually, I think a well executed back shoulder is impossible.
And we have a quarterback that can do it well.
Yeah. Mahomes throws that thing like so. It's impossible to cover it. It's crazy.
Remember, like Rodgers throwing that to Jordy Nelson back in Green Bay. Like, nobody could stop it.
Yeah.
Speaking
Michael says here, wide receivers and running backs aren't huge. And they all seem too thin. Yeah, I think that's what kind of get into is that we need a bulkier.
Yeah, we need a different body type, right?
It would be great if Easy E would just get it together, but it doesn't seem like it's going to happen.
Yeah, because he fits that need, right?
Yeah, he fits that mold.